Hey, so in the past weeks, I've been talking a lot about play. And a few weeks back, I talked about what play meant to me when I use it to talk about this channel and this church specifically, which was more of a philosophy or concept of play, very ideological, play along with a bunch of big words that have a feeling behind actions instead of the actions themselves, like love or honor. Honor! Anyhow, uh, I wanted to do a companion talk about when I say play as part of this church, what do I mean? The big conceptual, love, honor, friendship, devotion, fealty, piety, etc., etc., etc. Play versus what the everyday person might think of when I say play, which is going to be a guess. I can't know what other people think, but what I can do is look at community resources. I've done a lot of reading about various articles, scholarly people talking a lot about the concept of play, the experiences of play, the results of play, but none of those are really something that's clear what kind of copyright they have. And since I'm looking for groupthink about play concepts, and I want something that's, Creative Commons ish, I'm going to go react to the articles on Wikipedia about play. Now, I know that a lot of people feel that Wikipedia is not a reliable narrator or a good resource, and I completely understand where they're coming from. However, in the context of this chat right now, I'm specifically looking for what the general perspective of play is, and I will be commenting and reacting to that as we go. All right, so, and I will be putting the link to the two pages that I'm going to be talking about in the description once I post this to YouTube. All right, so when I look up play in Wikipedia, there is a general article which breaks down into things like play most commonly refers to activity or theater. And for the most part, I'm talking about the general activity, but I love that they mention theater. But they also get into computers and technology, film, game and sports, literature, and publications. There's a huge section about music, such as classical, artists and bands, various albums called play, songs called play, uh, tours and concerts called play, and awards called play. There's television, there's media, there's video games, and other uses of the word as a proper noun, not necessarily the activity. However, I do think that this list is interesting in that it mentions gaming, films, sports, literature, music, and theater, and also like television and uh, other such things. And I think that's a pretty good representation of what the everyday person might think when I start using the word play. They're going to be going back to maybe the first time they encountered play is when they were developing as a person and starting to become their own set of experiences, which would be like hide and seek or tag, or maybe the first time they heard the word play instead of the individual games that they were introduced to, it would be we're going to the play. So I think that this is fair to look at the main article on Wiki and see that it's giving us a broad overview of activities and actions, which is interesting because quite a lot of the things that I was reading to try to think about how other people might conceptualize play, they were conceptualizing the mindfulness of playfulness, the internal landscape versus the external landscape, which I think is a fair duality to talk about. But in general, I think it is supportable that saying play means doing a thing to most people. So when I switch over to play as an activity in Wikipedia, they define it, and I'm going to quote here: play is a range of intrinsically motivated activities done for recreation. Play is commonly associated with children and juvenile level activities, but may be engaged at any life stage, and among other higher functioning animals as well, most notably mammals and birds. Unquote. I think that that's a fairly fair opening statement. I especially like the intrinsically motivated because of that internal versus external dichotomy. There's the difference between somebody raking a Zen garden and seeing it as playful versus somebody raking a Zen garden and seeing it as purely meditative, or somebody raking a Zen garden and seeing it as a duty, and as somebody raking a Zen garden and seeing it as work. All of those things can happen at once. It could be dutiful work that is, playful, etc., 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 but only one of them, and they're all internally motivated. So I think it is fair to say that play comes from the inside. It's an experience of doing the activity. No activity, even something that is a game, I think can be assumed to be 100% playful. So it's up to the person experiencing things to say whether or not something is play. I also think that it's fair for this article to have said that it's associated with children and juvenile level activities. When we started building this church, and we talked with the board of directors, there was a lot of discussion about the feeling of frivolity or shame that might come from prioritizing play as an adult to the point that you would build a church around it. But I do think that play is worthy of that kind of consideration. So let's talk about some of the definitions and forms from this Wikipedia link. All right. So you're going to be able to go to the link later, and it talks about the different definitions, and some of the definitions are fairly archaic at this point. So I think I want to go to the one from the 21st century National Playing Fields Association's definition, which is, quote, play is freely chosen, personally directed, intrinsically motivated behavior that actively engages the child, unquote. They were doing so good until they reduced it down to something that is only childlike. So let's go past the definition and into the forms that they list in this generally seen view of what play is. And they list a whole bunch of things like, quote, play can take the form of improvisation, pretense, interaction, performance, mimicry, games, sports, and thrill seeking, including extreme and dangerous sports like skydiving, high-speed racing, etc. Unquote. They list things such as attunement play, where you make a connection with somebody. Body play, like if you've ever played your belly as a drum, you've done it. Creative play, which is interesting that they consider creative play to be its own category. I find that I guess a lot of these are things you can mix and match, stack, like imaginative or pretend play, object play, such as banging pots and pans. Again, this is extraordinarily child-focused. Social play, storytelling, and then they're like, okay, the California-based National Institute for Play has those 7: attunement, body, creative, pretend, object, social, storytelling. They're saying that another classification uses a different set of categories, and I'd have to go down to the footnote, which is not easily, anyhow. They instead chop play into challenge, competitive, constructive, cooperative, creative, pretend, nurturing, and replica. And it's interesting to me that they have competitive, constructive, and cooperative. That's an interesting way to chop it up. Anyhow. So then there's a huge amount of time spent talking about play in children. How it's good, how it deals with cognitive development and all this socialization. When they talk about history, they're talking about the history of play in children, which is a really interesting thing because, for example, the ball courts of Central and South America are some of the most civically central and important artifacts we have of that civilization, which was in that's not a child artifact. But here we are talking about play extremely child focused, which I think says a whole lot about the way that our society treats play. So they talk about cultural differences, they talk about sports, but then they're talking about sports in the way of like the benefits to youth, things like being active and learning sportsmanship, stamina and strength. And finally, they have like a small section on play in adults, which is disappointing. But I think it's a lot of what I spend some of my chats reminding adults about, that they can do this too. For example, quote, imaginative play and role play may allow adults to practice useful habits such as learned optimism, which is helpful in managing terrors or fears, unquote. The first published chat, not the first one I ever did, the first chat I ever did was about joy. But the first one that got published to YouTube was about not being afraid. So yeah. And then under adults, they have very little dedicated, but the bulk of the dedication is to workplace, where they talk about how play can be harnessed to make working more endurable, which is true, but it's tragic. I wish that there was more talk about playing as an adult and how it can be part of a fuller life instead of helping to offset the stress of the way that the world is right now when it comes to work. And then they break adulthood off into a separate section for seniors, which, if they're thinking about it as before you are part of productivity, then how play helps with productivity. And then after, when you're allowed to or not allowed to be productive anymore, it's sadly, I think, commercial mindset, and I think it says a lot about this English language article. But again, this chat is entirely about, when I say play, I think of something very inspiring. But when somebody else says play, they might be thinking about the short amount of time they have on Friday to be with their friends, which is sad. Then there's a little bit about animals playing, which I agree with. I mean, it's part of the mission statement of it that we feel that this is natural and intrinsic and innate. Anyhow, and then finally they get into physical, mental, and social, quote unquote, as little as 10 minutes of play, quote, start over. As little as 10 minutes of exercise, including physical play, can improve cognitive abilities, unquote. Anyhow, and that's the articles. Those are the two articles, and this has been my reaction to it. So if I was to sum up, they are talking very much about the common contexts in which the mindset of playfulness and the internal motivation of wanting to play is expressed in activities. And that's fair. And then they're talking about the different ways you can express these activities, the different realms, whether or not it's by like sports or music, or whether it's by competitive versus collaborative, which can stack. And I think that this is all really fair, but it's extraordinarily sad that they consider it to be childish. And I have done a chat about that. So I think I'm going to take this as inspiration that I want this church to be available to remind people that play is a good thing, that you can have it, you should have it, and that it's something that you can prioritize outside of needing to learn something, needing to blow off steam, or something that you have to put aside and never enjoy again. Play is yours. So, do I agree with these articles? Yes. Do I think these articles are everything and everything that there should be? No, but I think it's a fair thing to do a slice of talking about it today. So, thank you for being with me today. I hope to talk to you next Sunday. Next Sunday, I will probably continue with the Play is the Gift theme, and I will be talking about how play is a gift you can give yourself when you need something. Have a great week, everyone. Bye.